For her to get relief, Meri ate blocks of milk chocolate alone late at night. Because relief eating isn't random, it's not a weakness, and it's not simply a lack of willpower, it's a system. In today's episode, I'm taking you inside the hidden logic of relief eating, the type of eating that can feel frightening, overpowering, and deeply shameful, yet at the same time almost impossible to let go of. And through Meri's story, we're going to look at what relief eating is, its purpose, and why understanding the eating system beneath changes everything. Listen in. Hi there, it's Bronwyn. Welcome back to Before Dieting. In this episode, we're going to take a deep and honest look at something that scares many women, and that's relief eating. The type of eating that almost feels like a force of nature that can blindside you at any time. But before I go any further, I want to be clear about where I'm coming from. I'm looking at relief eating as a systems thinker, not as a clinical psychologist or an eating disorder specialist. The work I do is to help DIY dieters understand the repeatable, predictable mechanics of their eating behaviour. If you think you might be dealing with a diagnosable eating disorder, you need to seek help from a qualified medical professional alongside anything we discuss here. From my 1,000 conversations with women, I identified 8 distinct types of eating and called them by recognisable names, or I hope I did. But of all the types, relief eating was the one that caused the most stress and misunderstanding, and that's because it's the one that seems least able to be controlled. But it really matters that we make a distinction here, a clear distinction between binging and relief eating, because I believe that correct descriptive naming is one of the ways of being able to restore agency over it. Now, while there's a clinical definition of binging in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, no wonder they abbreviate that to the DSM, binging has become almost a cliche that's used for everything from shopping to watching Netflix. It's generic and it's not helpful in understanding anything. And as I've said in previous episodes, labelling something is the quickest way to close down the mind. And what we want here is we want to open up the topic. We want to open up relief eating so we can identify all its moving parts, and particularly where the food seems to have such a power over you. As with every episode of Before Dieting, the purpose is to step away from the blame and shame loop, and so we can actually take a good look at how the behaviour actually works. And in today's episode, to understand what relief eating looks like in a daily human context, you'll be hearing about Meri's experience. The level of honesty that she brings is exactly what's needed to bring relief eating out of the shadows and into some light. And her story is a powerful example of how these systems form and why they make so much more sense when you see the full picture. In my conversation with Meri, her goals were very clear. She didn't start by talking about a weight goal at all. She talked about being released from the grip that food has over her. She believed that if she could let go of that grip, she would become what she called a natural, relaxed eater. But for now, Meri lives with a constant tug-of-war inside. She talks about her fear of food that sits right next to the fear that the weight she's lost about a year ago is slowly starting to creep back. She has a critical voice that never shuts up. It's always telling her she could do better, she could lose more weight. So for her, life feels like a very either-or. She's either hypervigilant about what she eats or frequently overeating, with nothing solid and trustworthy in between. Now, from the outside, Meri looks calm and in charge of her life, but inside she feels like a hostage. She keeps this very rigid list of acceptable and unacceptable foods, yet even when she's eating from the acceptable list, the mind traffic about food never lets up. So to begin to understand how she ends up regularly relief eating, we need to look at the situations where relief eating happens. Now, from a systems point of view, we don't see behaviour as random. It doesn't just happen. So when I ask Meri what she knows about her relief eating, she has 2 constants. When she can eat alone, and always it happens in the late evening. Then when I ask her about what she eats, she said it could be anything sweet, but mostly it's milk chocolate, and she eats it in family-sized blocks. As she talks further, what's really striking is how mixed her thinking is before it happens. On one hand, she hates this type of eating, and on the other, she looks forward to it. And that brings us to the secrecy. For Meri, the secrecy creates its own kind of rush. She says it isn't easy to describe, but it feels like the kind of private rebellion or a way of having something that is hers and hers only. So in that sense, this secret status gives her a sense of independence. It starts to feel like a reliable friend, even though afterwards she feels ashamed. The very things she dislikes about it are the very things that keep it in place, and that's an important point to see. So that led us to a key question. If this eating gives such a strong sense of relief, what else could possibly take its place? And the important concept in systems thinking is that every behaviour, even the ones that look self-destructive, makes sense in the right context. So when Meri thinks about stopping her relief eating, she has a rising fear, because if she stops, what is left in that gap? If milk chocolate is no longer there, what could give her that same hit of relief? So strange as it might seem, at this stage of the conversation, Meri can see that her relief eating does have benefits. It allows her to wind down and fall asleep. Without it, the nervous energy is too much. It lets her disconnect for a while and not be in her body. And another benefit is it gives her something to do in the evening and fills the space when boredom or loneliness show up. And because she has so much shame around her relief eating, Meri was surprised to realise that it might in fact be helping her in some ways. And when we look further into Meri's history, the logic of her nightly eating becomes very clear. Because Meri grew up effectively as an only child with much older parents who felt more like her grandparents. Her childhood home was a place of strict food rules, set meal times, and she remembers being hungry a lot of the time. From the age of about 7, to solve her hunger, she became very skilled at what she now calls the nightly raid. Once her parents were asleep, she would creep into the kitchen and raid the fridge and pantry. She learned how to cut paper-thin slices of meat and cheese so that no one would notice. And in the laundry, where the bulk food was stored, she became an expert in the cover-up, arranging empty chocolate wrappers to look like they were still full. She described it as her delicious secret. It was the way she could outsmart the rules and meet her own needs. Today, though, her parents are long gone, but Meri is still breaking the rules. The child who secretly ate to calm her hunger has become the adult repeating that childhood solution. The difference is now she feels like she has no control over it, but it certainly has a lot of control over her. Giving names to physical and mental signs of these patterns gives us a bit of ground to stand on. Relief eating isn't a messy blur. It has 3 phases that I've named hungering, eating, and resolution. And when Meri was able to slow it down and connect with the repeating eating experience, she was able to describe what happened in each of these 3 phases. In that first phase of hungering, physically she notices a restlessness or a speedy agitation, and that comes up in her chest, her shoulders, and her neck. On an emotional level, there's a sinking feeling, feelings that were a mixture of fear and abandonment, and very strong sense of urgency to get rid of it. And of course, on the mental level, there are a chorus of voices, all driving her to eat. When we look at the second phase, or the eating phase, this is when the autopilot takes over, and Meri describes it as zoning out and disconnecting from her body. And finally, the resolution phase. This is where the consumption, in her case of milk chocolate, reaches a level where she comes to. The agitation that she felt in the hungering stage is gone, but she's left feeling disappointment, regret, and shame. When Meri could see that these phases are parts of a process, it stopped feeling like a personal failure, and it becomes a system that you can study and work with. And there's a kind of paradox at the centre of changing patterns like this, and it has to do with permission. For years, Meri's thinking was split into silos. One part of her hated the behaviour, but another part needed it. And so she was stuck in this loop of judgment and self-argument. In hindsight, Meri could see it was the same childhood pattern that she was now repeating as an adult. And once she could see that, it gave her more ways to think about and examine her eating instead of thinking that more willpower was the only answer. She was able to give herself permission, just a small amount to start, to observe the process without attacking herself. And once she did that, she said the intensity of the urge began to ease. The goal here isn't to fix this behaviour instantly. That can't be done. It's got very long history and that doesn't go away overnight. But the goal is to become someone who can stay conscious of what's happening, start to recognize the body signals that you've got, and then maybe swap out, find something less calorific than the milk chocolate. The main message in Meri's story is this, that relief eating is a system. It's not a personal failure. And like Meri, these systems were built in a particular life context to do a particular job. And they've been doing that job for a very long time. So to start your own inquiry, let's move away from the question, how do I stop eating like this? And maybe see if we can just work around the topic of relief and say, what relief am I needing here? What am I needing relief from? Try to get to the questions that are less judgmental and more inquiry-based. Even that is a small step forward to actually you regaining some control over this. It takes a lot of courage to talk honestly about the everyday reality of relief eating and not trivialise it with a term like binging. I know on the surface it's easy to joke about being a chocoholic or binging on salty snacks, but inside it can leave you feeling frightened and powerless. But there is an explanation for this, and there is a way for this to change. But first you need to understand the system you've built and the job that it's doing for you. That's why I created the diagnostic, so you can look deeply into your own history without that blame and shame and find answers that will give you back some sense of choice about how you want to eat. I want to leave you with a reframe that might help you put shame to one side and find the courage to look more closely at your own relief eating. Think about if you take your car to a mechanic because it's doing things you can't control. Describing the problem will only get you so far. At some point, the mechanic has to lift the bonnet and examine the engine. So thanks for listening, and I'll talk with you next week. But before you go, it would really help if you left a rating or review. It makes it easier for other women to find this work. And if you have a friend, a colleague, or maybe even a sibling who needs to hear her eating is purposeful, not shameful, please send her this episode.